All right, in this video we're going to look at energy flow in ecosystems. We're going to explain how energy flows through ecosystems and explain how ecological pyramids help us analyze energy flow through the various trophic levels or the feeding levels of the food chains and food webs. So a food chain and a food web are related things. So energy flows through ecosystems in a one-way path. The primary producers convert either sunlight energy or chemical energy into food. Some of they use, some of they transfer on to the next level through the various consumers till you get to the top consumer. A food chain is a series of organisms in which energy is transferred from one organism to another. It's basically a list of who eats who. And it shows the pathway of energy in one part of the ecosystem. A food web, on the other hand, is a network of feeding interactions through which both energy and matter move. It's basically all the interconnected food chains in an ecosystem. So when we're talking about food chains and food webs, we use this term trophic level. And it describes the steps in a food chain or food web. So you have your primary producers, you have your primary consumers, your secondary consumers, your tertiary consumers, and on up the line. So here we have a food web. We've got algae, a primary producer, being eaten by the flagfish, which gets eaten by a largemouth bass, which gets eaten by the bird, which can be eaten by the alligator. So again, this is a food chain, a part of the entire food web. So you have, it all starts with your primary consumers, algae and your plants and things like that. You have your things that eat your primary consumers, the herbivores. You have your various carnivores, which eat the primary consumers and secondary consumers. And then you have your scavengers like the vulture. You have your decomposers and detrivores, the bacteria and fungi and things that break things down after things have died. So decomposers and detrivores are really important. They help recycle things so that the primary producers don't run out of nutrients and materials to do photosynthesis and so on. So decomposers convert dead matters or dead materials into detritus, which is then either eaten by detrivores or is released in the form of nutrients that can be used by the primary producers to build new tissues and do photosynthesis and so on. So if we have a disturbance in a food web, sometimes it's easy to predict what's going to happen. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes we get part of it right. Sometimes we get none of it right. Because food webs, there's a lot of complex interactions, it's difficult to predict what will happen when there's a disturbance in a food web. Ecological pyramids are models that show the relative amounts of energy or matter contained in each trophic level. At the bottom you have your producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. So again, with an energy or a biomass pyramid, it's always going to be wider at the base and narrower at the top. Now there's one type of pyramid called a numbers pyramid where it can be inverted, but that's the only type. So a pyramid of energy shows the amount of energy in a particular food chain or food web. So it's important to know that only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level is transferred on to the next trophic level. So we start with our primary producers. They've got a certain amount of energy. When they're eaten by the first level consumers, the primary consumers, the herbivores, about 10% of that energy is transferred on to the first level consumers. And then when they're eaten by the carnivores, the second level consumers, about 10% of that 10%, or about 1% of the original energy is transferred on. And then when the tertiary consumers or the next level consumers, third level consumers consume those guys, about 10% of that 1%, or about a 10% of the original energy is transferred on. So you can see how the available amount of energy decreases in a very predictable way. And that's going to also cause a change in the matter also changes this way when we look at this. So here we have a biomass pyramid. Again, the amount of living matter, and that changes as you go up through the food chain or food web as well.